One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So today's plan, we are going to paint this lizard folk warrior from Reaper Miniatures. And this is an interesting little figure, very simple figure. And so my plan is to basically kind of show how to use yellow to create really bright highlights without making things completely turn yellow. We'll see if it works. We might turn everything yellow, but that's the general idea for today. And the other thing we're going to do, so it's going to be a classic Lizardman. He's going to have dark green skin. He's going to be all green and scaly. But two slightly different things we'll do. One is, as I said, we're going to use Reaper Sun Yellow, this bright yellow to do our highlighting. And the other thing we're going to do is we are going to give him a cool, like, throat waddle sort of thing, like an iguana maybe, but it'll have like a bright blue color. So I'm going to be using, what's this? Surf Aqua is going to be our blue for our throat flap thing. And the other thing we're going to do is this spear is designed to be like it's stone, but we are going to do it as copper non-metallic metal. So we're going to make it look like a beaten piece of copper as opposed to a piece of flint, just for fun and games. So that's the general plan for the day. The colors we are going to use. So to start with, we need to give him a very dark green skin base. So I'm going to be using green liner. You could also just as easily use brown liner to create that very dark shadow we need to start with for this skin tone. Either one of those will work. And then I'm going to be using camo green, which is a sort of desaturated blackish gray green, and then Reaper leaf green, 9176 military green, sorry, and 9011 leaf green. So it's a dark green, almost like an olive green, and a standard sort of mid-tone green. A green. And to highlight those, we're going to use a combination of creamy ivory and sun yellow working together to create nice, warm, light highlights for that green. For his facial features, his mouth, his tongue, we're going to use burgundy wine. You could really use any dark purple or very dark red. And we're going to use pale violet. You could also use, you could really use any sort of lighter magenta type color. As I said, Surf Aqua will be through for his little flash of color. And for the wood, I'm going to start out with Reaper's tanned leather, and I'll highlight up from there using the creamy ivory. Sort of a general plan, and I'll probably use some ink on that to change the color a little bit. In fact, I'm just going to decide now. I am going to use some ink on that, and we'll use my favorite transparent raw sienna to add a bit of warmth and yellowness to that wood. And then for all the leather accoutrements, well, all the leather accoutrements, the leather on the spear and the strap on his shield, we're going to use russet brown. So, but any dark brown, blackened brown, any of those browns will work. Oiled leather, but you could use Reaper's leather brown, polished leather, basically any sort of not super saturated orange brown. And then to highlight on that, we'll do some leather damage, that kind of stuff, with the tanned leather. So those are our three to do the leather straps and that sort of thing. And I'm going to use this earth brown color, literally Reaper earth brown, to do the dirt. And then from there, what else is left? Oh yeah, the tarnished copper. We use that to do the tarnished copper. Oh, and I guess I could use Reaper's new copper. So tarnished copper, new copper, and some white. This will be for our NMM. And if we need to make this darker, we'll just use some brown liner or some black or whatever. Okay? But you don't need to use tarnished copper for this. You could use, I mean, these colors are nearly identical. What's that? Oiled leather and tarnished copper is really just a dark sort of red brown or orange brown. Anything like that would work. Okay, so that's the general plan for the day. So this is kind of a fun little mini. You don't need the best brushes for this. Pretty much any sort of general brush would do, except for doing his eyes and maybe a little bit of the damage on the leather. Maybe we'll do that, a little bit more of a fine detail. Pretty much any kind of mid-sized brush will do. That's a size 2 Winsor & Newton, size 3 Artist Opus, anything like that sort of size would do. There's the brush versus the mini. Get a sense of the size of that. And the first thing we're going to do is put a base coat on all the skin. Now, I've got him zenithal so that you can see what he looks like. And now I'm going to completely paint him over green. That's been the way I've been doing things a lot lately. So we're going to change the plan slightly. Let's do a mid-tone green and add shadow and add highlight instead. So I'm going to start by getting a big old pile of this military green on the palette. I can see already that that's all dried up. I'll clean out the mess out of that. And of course I'll put it on my napkin or paper towel there so that I can then put it in my palette. There we go. Nice big blob of military green. That was a bit of sarcasm. By putting that mess from my bottle of paint onto my paper towel, I'm going to pollute my paintbrush with that. So that's not the best idea. But I know I've got to do, say, a bunch of these paints in the same way. So once I've got them all opened and cleaned out, I'll replace my paper towel. Kind of the time of year makes that happen, I think. The paints dry out a lot faster, even though I'm using these most days. They get very dried up very quickly. Alright, so there's our leaf green. Big old dollop of leaf green. We will need some, I'm going to use green liner. There's my green liner. Don't need as much of that since I'm going to use that to shade, not to do my base coat. And then we need the happy sun yellow and creamy ivory. My God, all these paints are just dried right up. Yep. Poor paint storage habits on my part, probably. Let's clean that out. Nice big blob of yellow. And now hopefully this creamy ivory isn't dried up. I was using this literally like this morning. No, it's messy, but it's not all dried up. There we go. Lots of creamy ivory. So this is our start to the palette. Green liner or brown liner, camo green, military green, mid-tone leaf green, yellow, and ivory. That's where we're starting from. And I think I want to get my earth brown on there fairly early on as well. I'll put some earth brown down in the corner there. Alright, and now I'm going to get rid of this messy, wrecked paper towel. Place it with a clean one. I also cleaned out my paint water just a few minutes ago, so I'm painting with nice clean water. There we go. Okay, let's get painting. So I'm going to start by putting on a base coat of this camel green color over the whole, over all the skin on the lizard folk. This does not have to be a perfect base coat because we're going to do a lot of highlighting over this. You can think of this color as being like the second shadow color. So the darkest shadow color is going to be green liner. This camel green is going to be the second shadow, and then our mid-tone will be the leaf green, and then we'll highlight on all of that. So the question I just saw was, where is skin? So on this guy, pretty much everything that is not equipment is skin. I think the only thing that I'm going to leave out probably be his mouth and his teeth. But outside of that, everything should be treated as skin. So I'll put this first coat of paint over everything. We could do it so that he has like a lighter belly, but my plan is just to, I'm not doing that. We're just going to make him like all one sort of green color. I suppose we could do some like fancier cryptic camouflage pattern stuff on his back if we want to. Maybe we'll do that at the end. If we see how the time goes, we'll see if we have time to just throw some like diamond patterns or some stripes or something over over the skin on his back. Make him look a little bit more interesting. It's gonna look pretty interesting anyway with his bright blue dewlap and his pink tongue that he's gonna have. His bright yellow lighting. Yep, paint everything green. I'm sure there's a correct technical term for that structure on a reptile. Might even be different depending on the reptile. I'm sure there's somebody out there who knows the accurate terminology for that. I used to know all that stuff, but partly I just forget, and partly I stopped trying to remember. I can make it whatever color I want without knowing what it is. I have to get a new spice jar soon. This one's getting kind of beat up. I've dropped it enough times that it's starting to crack. And some little kid will come in here one day and grab it and get cut, so I suppose I better replace it. This lizard man had lots of little mold lines, particularly around his chin, around his little spines on his back and that sort of thing, that were a bit hard to remove, but I think I got enough of them removed anyway, since this is not like a competition piece or anything like that. We're just gonna paint it for fun, and if we're lucky, he'll end up on my D&D table. Maybe somebody will make a lizard folk player character. I think we've got that now. We've got green everywhere that it's supposed to be. Give that all a moment to dry. Oh, there's a spot we missed. Okay, so I've painted everything green on him. Yeah, it's the top of him that I missed because of the camera angle, right? And I'd be having to hold the bottle in a certain position. The handle in a certain position. There. I think I'm good now. Alright, so, well, I'm going to give that a moment or two to dry. I'm going to paint the dirt on this base, this earth brown color. Now there's kind of a cool little leaf on his base. I'm not going to paint that brown, but I want to make sure I paint the space in between his toes. Oh, look, there's a mold line that I missed. Gotta be more careful. I did this green stuff this morning, so it's probably not dry yet. But one of the cool things about green stuff is you can prime it, you can paint over it. Well, it's still wet. It doesn't seem to do any particular harm. Paint probably doesn't stick as well, and if there's water in the paint, it probably affects how the green stuff sets, but seems to be working well enough. And there he is. Still looks a little bit wet, so I'm not going to rush forward with painting the skin just yet. Give it another moment to dry. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll put this tanned leather base coat, or whatever light brown color you want to use. I'm going to use this as the base of the wood color, and we might as well put some russet brown on the palette as well to be the base color for the leather straps. Might as well get some of those done now too. So the tanned leather is for the shaft of the spear. Probably need 2 coats on that. It's quite a light color. I'm not super concerned about this mini being painted very smoothly. He's kind of a rough looking warrior to start with, but generally speaking, I want to put down a bit of paint and then work just one edge of it to spread it out and not repaint and repaint and repaint, so that I avoid tearing up chunks of partly dried paint. So I'll start, say, down here at the bottom on this side of the spear, and I'll work my way forward along the spear, watching the paint, so that if I see it start to dry, I'll stop working it, but generally just working my way forward away from the paint that's drying to reduce the risk of doing damage to the partly dried paint. Get the top of that spear. Less important on something like this spear, but if I was painting, say, skin tone on like a smooth face or something like that, that's where you want to be careful to not tear up the partly dried paint. So I'm going to switch to my dark brown now, this russet brown, but you can use whatever color you like. And the areas that I need to paint are going to be, I'm going to paint the whole turtle shell, the strap of leather on his wrist, and these leather straps on the spear. Oh, he's got a leather strap on both wrists. So the leather strap on both wrists will get this color. I'm not really sure what color I want to do the turtle shell yet. I mean, we could paint it as though it's a painted shell. We could paint it like it's worn. There's lots of different options. Think about it as we go. Might have a bit of a reddish tone, I think, by the time we're done. Or maybe a magenta tone, since we're painting his skin with magentas. Or not his skin, his mouth and his tongue are going to be a magenta sort of color. We can use some magenta to color up this turtle shell. So the reptile, like turtle skin, like if say a painted turtle or like a red-eared slider or whatever they call those turtles, their skin tends to be interesting colors, but the shell itself tends to be kind of a dull color, but it gets polished where anything rubs on the shell regularly. So if the turtle is climbing on and off of like a log regularly, the log gets scratched up, but the edge of the shell might get polished. Even while the turtle is still alive, the edge of the shell could get polished. And so this turtle shell being used as a shield, it certainly could have damage to it, like scratches and that sort of thing, but it could also have like almost non-metallic metal style sort of shiny polished edges and surfaces. That's something to think about as we go forward, how we want to create some interesting colors on that. Okay, and now the last one will be this bit of the spearhead. It's been a nice quiet day here so far. I remember a couple of weeks ago we did one of these, and it was like a non-stop torrent of people coming through the door of the studio, which normally I don't mind, but on a particular day it was a bit much. All right, I think. Yeah, I'm going to mix a little tiny bit of green liner and a little bit of russet brown to make a really, really dark brownish kind of green. It's almost like brownish gray. So just a daub of dark green and dark brown. And this is going to be the underneath color of my metal spearhead. So I just mixed up this sort of random dark color using the colors I already had on the palette. And this is what I'm going to start with on my spearhead. You could paint the spearhead black, you could paint it dark purple or dark red even, and it would probably work. I just need some sort of a dark color to start with on it. And it'd be cool if that was dry by the time we came back to it, so I'm going to do that. Okay, and I think the last thing that needs to be base coated is going to be the mouth, so we might as well do that now too. Little tiny bit of burgundy wine in the palette, it's not going to take very much. And we're going to put that in his mouth. Probably in his mouth and in his eye socket up there. Put this red or burgundy wine in the eye socket. And around all the teeth. And his tongue. Now this is all going to be lightened a lot, so it's not going to look like he's like some sort of maniac who's been chewing on fresh corpses or something. We're going to lighten all that with the magenta, and won't look nearly as bad after we do that. So we'll do both eye sockets with this dark red color. He's got like a little plate that runs like along a ridge above his eye. So paint this color underneath that ridge. There. That works for me. Spot it there. Just quickly go over your figure and take a look, see if you missed anything. So we'll make sure we got everything kind of base coated now. And I'm pretty happy with that, although I think my spear does need a second coat of tanned leather. So I'm going to do that now. You should do the same, just have a quick look over your figure. Look for anything that needs to be touched up. And by touched up, all I mean is if you can still see gray or black showing through the base coat, just give it another quick thin coat of that color to hide that a little bit more. We are going to shade everything today, but and we're going to highlight everything. It all works better when you have a good start point to work from. Okay. Okay, so pretty much ready to start doing shadows. Okay. So now, got my green liner there. Nice dark cold green paint. And there's a couple different ways you could do this. One is you could just go for it and paint the dark green in as a shadow color, and that'll work. You could make a half step between this dark green and the green liner. That would work as well. But in this case, where this is the second shadow color, this is our deepest shadow, we're going to be going over this as a with this as a midtone. We don't need to be maybe quite so careful with half steps, so I'm just going to go straight to green liner. And my plan is to have basically like a central spot of light. So his biceps, his chest, his belly, the tops of his legs, the inside of the spear, like this, the edge of the spear facing towards him, and the top of the shield are going to be like they have like a spotlight shining on them. Anything outside of that is going to be more shadowed. So I'm going to start by let's take this dark green and we're going to put a line under his jaw like that. So now I've got a dark shadow under his jaw. And that's the approach I'm going to take with all of these shapes. I'm going to paint in a dark shadow line under each shape. So if we look at his chest, he's got these kind of bony ridges. So I paint that dark line underneath each of those. There's left and right side of his chest. And there's a line separating them down the center. So I'll paint this dark green in that as well. Moving further down, there's more lines on each side. So knowing that my light source is in the center, I'm going to just keep outlining essentially all these shapes that are below the light with this line anywhere that the light would not shine directly. Noting that the green that's already on there is also a shadow color. So I don't really have to completely cover it over. In fact, I shouldn't completely cover it over in the shadows. We want that color to be present in the shadow. So I'll keep working my way down along his belly. And he's got these really strongly developed muscles in his legs. We'll outline those with this color. So if I look at his leg, right in there, I want this color at the bottom of that muscle, up into the bottom of his knee. So this side of the muscle on his knee is going to be painted that color. There's like a tendon that runs from his groin along the back to the back of his knee. I'll put a dark line under that. There's a muscle right there in his thigh. I'll put a dark line around that. Okay, and I'll do the same thing on both sides of on both legs. Essentially outlining those muscle groups and tendon groups with this really, really dark green. And then the next step will be the tail. And the tail, which kind of projects forward through between his legs, each of those scale segments gets a line underneath it. And also along the left and right side of it all the way down. And then on the bottom of we're going to paint the bottom of the tail, which is away from the light. Just going to paint that really dark green. Okay. So now we've got most of those muscle groups done, and we look at his lower legs, the part of the leg which is away from the light. I'm just simply going to paint the bottom of his shins this color where the light wouldn't hit it directly, down to about the top of his foot. Going to make that really, really dark. And then we're going to continue that with his feet. He's got sharp little toes on his feet, so we're going to outline those talons with this dark green. We'll probably come back and paint those like a bone or that sort of color later on. I'm just going to outline the talons on the toes. So that's the view of the feet, the legs, the torso from the front. I want to do the same thing on the arms. So we look at that arm on the left. It's his right arm. We want to put this green underneath each of those muscle groups. And we will come back and rebuild highlights in those. But for now, we're going to make them quite dark shadows. Anywhere that leather meets his skin, there's going to be a line. So we're going to trace around that leather strap. We'll do the same thing where the wood meets his fingers. We'll put a little dark line, almost like we're black lining around all of those shapes. We're not quite black lining though, we're really putting in larger blocks of shadow. You do the same thing underneath his shoulder muscle. And I'll do that on both sides. Under the bicep, under the forearm, outline the leather bit against the shield. Sorry, outline the leather bracelet against his arm, on the shield arm. And then we're going to outline his fingers on the side that's holding the shield. Okay, now we're going to do his face on this side before we turn it around to the other side. So we've got little eyelids. So we outline the eyelids. We've got this sort of jawbone. Got some little creases in his snout. And we're going to outline the bottoms of the teeth against the burgundy wine. Make those things really well defined. And now, with the front done, turn them around the other way and do the same thing again. We'll start at the top. So we just did his face. Let's start up by his face. Outline the eye, jawline, outline the teeth that are already painted burgundy wine. We'll outline them again with his dark color. Line along the bottom of his jaw. Now what's different on the back is we've got these spines. So I'm going to outline the spines with the dark green. Anywhere there would be like a little flap of skin touching the spine where it would emerge through the skin, we're going to put a dark line. Now if you're feeling kind of super speedy, you could outline every scale with this color. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just block in some larger shadows. So like for example, his shoulder blades, right, his back comes down and there's a little bit of a crease there. So I'm just going to paint the bottom of that shoulder blade this color. I'm going to ignore that texture for now. I'm just going to paint right in there. Now you could do a wash over this with a very, very dark green, but that would actually take longer to dry than we really want to. I mean, you could be waiting half an hour for that to fully dry. So what I'm going to do is just do that large block of color, and by the time I come back to highlight, it's going to be dry, and then I'll just highlight each of the scales, and that'll give the same impression as if I had actually outlined every scale. So I'm going to work my way out along this arm holding the spear first. Outline all those muscles. Outline the leather strap on his wrist, both sides. And I'm just going to, in the same way that I've darkened the back of his body, I'm going to darken the back of his arm where the light wouldn't hit it directly. And then I'm going to finish the outlining of his fingers against the spear that I had started earlier when we were working on the front. So now it's looking pretty well defined. Same thing on his left arm, the shield arm. Outline the muscle groups, making sure we get nice dark shadows on the bottom of each of those groups. And this is what Reaper's triads are designed for, is to paint like a mid-tone and then paint in the shadow and then come back in, manually paint in that highlight, and then afterwards, if you glaze over that with the mid-tone, you'll end up with a reasonably good blending effect. Okay, so now on the lower part of his body, I'm going to put that strong shadow back in around the bottom of his tail, like below where his hips are. Look at this, the shadow there, strongly defined. And the backs of his legs on this side are pretty much all going to be dark green, because remember, our light is in front in the center. And then the bottom of each of these muscle groups, under the calf muscles. We already painted the fronts of the shins dark green. And now I'm going to paint under the backs of his feet dark green, because again, the light's not going to shine on them directly. They don't have to be particularly dark, but we could always decide to come back and lighten them later if we want to. And then underneath his left foot the same way. Now this tail kind of goes down and points forward. So about the bottom third of it, if it's the bottom, like the last third of its length that's visible from this side, is going to be really dark. It's not going to even get much bounce light from the ground. So we'll just really darken that up. I think we're kind of there. It's looking pretty well defined. Okay, and I think I'm going to paint the leaf green liner. So just paint the whole leaf green liner. Now your leaf might not look like mine, because I accidentally cut half of my leaf off when I put him on his base, and I had to resculpt it a bit. But you should have sort of 4 like philodendron leaves or whatever these are called, and just paint them all green liner. You could also do a wash of green liner over the whole base if you want. That wouldn't be a bad thing. Let's do that. So I'm going to take my green liner, move some off to the side, and add, let's say, 2 big brushfuls of water into it to make a wash. There's how thin the paint is. You see it on my thumb there. And then I'm just going to liberally flood that over the base. Let it kind of run where it wants to, let it dry. It'll probably make coffee stains and everything like that, but that's okay. It doesn't matter on the base. We want the base to look a bit muddy and grimy. But most of that dark green should settle into recesses. It's kind of where we want it. And you can flood it because you're going to leave it alone to dry now for a while. And that's all good. All right, so now we can do the first layer of highlighting on the skin. Wrong. Now we're into our mid-tone on the skin, which is this. Well, I've kind of, my brush has had better days. I don't know if you can see how it's gone all staticky on me. All right, so we're going to do leaf green now, or whatever you're going to use for your mid-tone green. And we're going to do one layer of highlights pretty much on every shape on his skin. So it doesn't really matter whether it's the front or the back, or even if anything's in shadow. Like, let's look at the back of the tail, for example. Right, these scales that are very low down, close to where we just did the wash, the upper parts of those, we're going to give each of those a layer of this highlight color. Now the way I'm doing this, I'm just going to go slowly. My brush strokes are all going to go from bottom to top, because the top of the model on this side is lit more than the bottom. I'm going to keep working my way up one scale at a time, leaving the spaces in between each scale unpainted. Wow, that really does not show up on the camera, does it? Oh no, it's just my monitor. It doesn't show. It looks pretty good on the other camera. Okay. But the key is to leave the spaces between each scale and its neighbor unpainted, so they're darker, and that's how we're going to build up the scaly texture on his on the parts that have armor anyway, like the scaly armor. So brush strokes go from the bottom to the top, just done very lightly. Unthinned paint, because if we thin the paint, it'll flow down in between the cracks. So this is a bit like dry brushing, except that we're being very, very controlled with where we're putting these individual sort of dollops of color on the scale. And we're just going to keep doing that from the bottom all the way to the top. Now, I know this is one of those things where I do this stuff very, very fast. So just rest assured, when I get to the top of this set of scales, I'm going to check in with you before we go on to doing this on the smoother areas of skin tone. So just work at a speed that you can be precise. And always remember, now sometimes it's not possible and you need to change the brush direction, but try to do all the brush strokes going from bottom to top so that more of the color ends up at the top of the scale than at the bottom, which is sort of how the scales are going to reflect the light. Let me just keep going. Really amazes me the difference between the two monitors that I'm looking at. The monitor that I'm looking at to control the focus, the color really doesn't show well on that monitor. But then when I glance over to the corner of my eye and I see the Discord channel, the colors are really, really clear on the Discord channel. Much clearer than they are on this broadcast software. Alright, so there's scales on his hips that you have to access from the front. So we'll paint each of those scales individually green. And there's some on his shoulders as well that we can do in the same way. Just little dollops of green on each one separately. Now this probably means that there are scales on top of his shoulders that I can't see because of the angle that I'm holding the model on. And I'll just double check that. Oh yeah, lots of them. Why is it so dark? There they are. Get the glasses and everything lined up and suddenly I can see what I'm doing. Funny how that works. Highlighting these individual scales is probably going to be the most time-consuming part of this project. But that just took a couple of minutes for me to do all of those. So this guy's going to end up being a fairly quick, fun little guy to paint. Looks about like it. Now with these Bones figures, these are Bones 1 plastic figures. I've noticed that depending on which mold they come out of sometimes, you get different shapes or textures on the figure. So there might be scales that show up on mine that don't show up on other people's. That's pretty normal for these figures, so it's not really anything to be concerned about. Alright, that's where I'm at. I'm just going to clean my brush for a sec. Oh, okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do the larger muscle groups with this same leaf green. Now, in this case, what's different about how we do this? So I'm going to start with the muscles on the legs because they're probably the easiest ones. So let's look at this leg muscle here. This muscle here, we want it to be lighter at the top, darker at the bottom. So I'm going to start just above that dark green that we added in. So I'm leaving only a little bit of that first coat of paint, the military green that I put on there. And we're going to work up all the way to the bottom of that next scale. So there's a dark line on the next scale. I'm not going to cover that, but I'm going to cover everything up to that dark line. So what I should end up with is a dark green line around the muscle, a little bit of a shadow of military green, and then a nice solid layer of leaf green above that, right up to the bottom of the next muscle group. And I'll do that on this leg muscle again as well. So you can see the dark line that's there that I want to preserve. There's the dark line, there's the dark line. There's the mid-tone, or the first shadow of military green. So I'll start above that. My brush strokes go upwards, but I come almost right up to the bottom of this muscle. And then I pull the paint up towards the bottom of the next one. Like this. And I'll just keep moving it until I see that the paint is starting to dry, and then I'll stop so I don't tear up the paint too much. So that gives me a nice strong highlight leading up to that next shadow line. I'll do the same thing on this sort of groin muscle here. Pulling the paint upwards, right up to the edge of the shadow of the next scale. Same for this one right here in the center. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to do. I'm going to do a few more on this side and then check in to see how people are doing with that, because this is probably the most useful part of this, and we're going to do this quickly with a rapid succession of colors as we go forward. So we want to make sure we understand this part pretty well. So there's my shadowed line under the next scale. There's my military green that I want to preserve. And I pull the paint all the way up to that line. And the reason I'm pulling my brushstrokes upward is because my light is going to be centered in on the face of the figure. Do the next one. Same way. Just a little bit of military green left at the bottom. And then the next one. So why do I go all the way up to the bottom of the next shadow? Why don't I leave a little bit of military green showing at the top? The reason for that is that's not how shadows on these kinds of shapes actually work. So if I look at my fingers, right, say right in here, the highlight goes almost all the way into the shadow. It's very, very light across the top of the finger. So the part that I'm leaving military green is kind of this bit, and then dark green underneath. And this amount of what would be military green on our model is so small it's almost invisible. So we just go right up to the dark line and make it look very precise. Okay, and keep going. We'll do the other side. So on the other side of this, of his belly armor, the brushstrokes go the opposite direction. They pull up towards the light in the center and leave a little bit around the periphery of military green, a little bit around the bottom. The brushstrokes come up and towards the center. And getting a little bit faster and faster with each one. Okay, so that's how we do this. Now I'm just going to check in with everybody, see if anybody has any questions on that, because we're about to start doing that like kind of lightning speed as we go. If anybody's having a problem with that, let me know and I'll take a look. I'll give it a couple of seconds, and if I don't hear from you, I'll just keep blazing forward. Going to start working on this other leg. There we go. There's one person. Check the photo up. Yes. Yep. Bella the cat. Really good. Bang on the money. Yeah, you can even leave a little bit more of your darker color shown at the bottom of each muscle. But that is right on. Yeah, that's exactly what we want to see. Okay, let's keep going. So I'm going to do his other leg. Same way. It's a bit of an awkward angle to paint that muscle, but I'm going to start at the bottom of that muscle on his leg. Then there's this tendon group, and I'm going to keep the shadow on the bottom of that. Can't really do it from the shadow towards the light side, so I just have to work with it. Same thing with this muscle in here. Now if I was left-handed, that might be easier, but I'm not. Go. And this other big muscle in his thigh. Okay, kind of liking that. Do the other leg muscle as well. Little kneecaps. But I'm not going to put this color on the bottom of his leg. Just going to keep this on the top. So like that calf muscle that I can just about see through there. We'll put this on this is the leaf green. We'll put this on the top of that muscle and move forward, but we're not going to paint this on the bottom of his leg. We will come back and paint all of his the scales on the top of his toes, though. And let's keep working our way down those scales in his tail from the front view. And paint them exactly the same way. Cool. All right, now his other leg, the calf muscle there shows. So we'll start the back of that calf muscle and work our way up to the knee, top of the knee, top of the ankle. But we don't need to paint the front of his calf. But now he's got these little scales that project forward. So we'll paint the top of each of those scales this green color. Now the temptation is going to be to creep that all the way up under his knee. We don't need to, though. Just the front of these scales towards the light side. And then, of course, tops of his toes, which don't have to be perfect. He's been walking in the mud all day. They can be a bit of a mess. Okay, pretty happy with that now. Now we're going to start doing the chest muscles. These heavy armor scaly plates. I'm going to leave a little bit more of the green showing on the side. Start just a few millimeters up. Leave more of the military green on the sides. Pull my brush strokes up towards the center, just as I did the other ones. Just leave a little bit more shadow on the edge where it starts to go into his armpit. But definitely make sure both those brush strokes come to the center and overlap in the middle. Why do we need them overlap in the middle? So we get nice green saturation. And that green saturation is going to be part of, yeah, it's looking good. It's a good photo. It's going to be part of what gives us the impression of that light in the center of his body. We'll just keep pulling them forward like that. And then we got these big scales. Same approach. Now I can go a little bit further towards his armpit on these ones. They're not as long as the ones that were underneath. We definitely go right up to the bottom of that dark edge of the scale above. But make sure you don't cover over the dark line between the scales in the center. Come right up to it, but don't cover it over. So this one has got to stay dark in the middle. And then with just a little bit of military green around the bottom of it, keep the paint moving in towards the center. Right on. Okay, I'm just going to clean my brush. My brush is getting dry. And just something to remind you that if the brush tip gets dry, it stops working. So hopefully you can see there's a blob of dried paint on the tip of that brush. I'm just going to very gently remove that. And there it is, right there. Can you see it? Right there. And that was stopping the paint from flowing. There's a couple other little bits of dried paint in there. We can gently remove those. We don't want to just grind it with a thumb tip. Gently pull those off. You don't want to damage the tips of the center bristles in the brush. But we also need the paint to flow. The paint must flow. Okay, so now we keep going on that chest. And the next one, you can go almost right to that shoulder. Like just the smallest amount of military green or whatever your dark green is on the side. And pull to the center. Get that from both sides. Tip of the brush right up almost to the kind of collarbone looking bit of scale, but make sure you leave those dark lines underneath. And now the collarbones. So the collarbone, we want to make sure we connect the top of that shoulder muscle to the end of the collarbone. So just whatever scale you've got going on in the corner there, connect it to the top of the collarbone, and then paint this line, this green color, as a line along the top of the collarbone, almost right to the center. A little bit of military green left underneath. Do the same thing coming from the opposite side. We would connect it to the scale on the shoulder, and then come all the way across. Then we got a little bit of like a tendon coming down from his neck, and on the other side a little bit of tendon coming down from his neck. We're going to paint on the top of that. Now you're going to say, but Geoff, we said we were going to paint that as like a threat color or something like that, and we are, but we're going to highlight everything first and then put the blue over top of it. So then the next thing I want to do is paint this part of the top of his chest up to the bottom of those tendons on his neck. Leave a bit of a shadow underneath those tendons, like that. And then we're going to paint his throat. Yes, paint his throat this green up to that shadow line that we painted under his jaw earlier. Okay, and that's kind of where you would stop at this step. Now we need to do the same thing on the muscle groups on the back. We're going to do his arms as well. So let's do it like this. We'll do his arms from the front. I'm going to start with his right arm. A little bit of a muscle there. Muscle hanging down under the bicep. I know it's got a name, but I don't remember what it is. On the bicep, we want to make sure we don't completely cover over that shadow we put in. We may have to cover some of it, but we go right up to the bottom of the shoulder muscle. Right up to the bottom, like that. Now, why am I insisting on that in this particular case? There's a couple of reasons. One is that it's going to make your highlights look much stronger. The other is that in the future, at some point, you may want to try airbrush blending, and you need the muscles highlighted in this way for airbrush blending to work properly. But for now, it's because we want the muscles, the highlights, to look really strong in his chest. Okay, we'll do the same thing on the forearm. Pull the color forward. Okay, and then we're going to do his other arm. His forearm, bicep, right up to the bottom of the shoulder. And then mine is a bit of a smooth patch on the top of the shoulder, so I'm going to paint that this color too. There we go. Other side of the forearm. And we need to do his hands. So back of the thumb. We paint that middle finger separately so it doesn't get connected to his thumb. Forefinger. There we go. And the other hand. Back of the thumb. Tips of the fingers. Because that's all we can see from this side. Now those might get painted a different color later. Okay. All right, we're going to do the back and then come back and do the face. So from the back, let's start with the backs of the arms. Let's start with the arm by the shield. We've got all these muscle shapes. So this is the shoulder I was talking about, where mine is quite smooth on the top. So I'm going to do that first. Then on the forearm, there's a tendon that runs all the way along the top, so I'll do that one. And then the next tendon down, I'm going to make sure I get the top of that all the way up to the bottom of the shadow above, and the same thing with this muscle on the back of his arm. Highlight it right up to the back of his shoulder. Just leave a slight dark line there. Do that for each of these muscle groups and tendon groups. And the back of his arm. And now we can do the other arm. And we'll start with the back of the hand. This is the hand holding the spear. So back of the index finger, connect that to the back of the thumb. And then the top of these little ridges on the back of his hand, leave a little bit of extra dark shadow there so those lines are visible. Back of his forearm. Top of that elbow flap. I mean, he's a lizard folk, so I guess his muscles might not exactly look like human anatomy, but there's some interesting differences between this guy and a sort of a human. Now, the leg muscles. Remember, we want the backs of the muscles, the backs of the legs to stay dark. So I'm going to start with his left leg. And I'm going to start just on the quad muscle above his knee. And I'm going to go up under the shield there. And then there's this next muscle underneath it. And I'm just going to do the top of that muscle. That's probably about as light as this side of the model is going to get. The top of that calf muscle at the back on his left leg. Top of the ankle. His heel. Side of his foot. That's probably light enough. And then on the leg by the spear, we've got that sort of tendon that runs down the outside of those scales. So we'll highlight the inside edge of that. And then this muscle back here is a bit of a strange shape, but we'll treat that the same as the others. Give it a highlight on top, but leave it dark underneath. And then small highlights on the calf muscles at the top of the heel. And that's probably enough for that one. We don't need to fill our shadows with highlights there. And now a little bit tougher part. So if you've got a brush with a nice point on it, now is the time to be using it. We're going to do the face. So this face has some interesting, finely sculpted features. So the first part is this jawline here. And we don't want to completely cover over the shadow or the military green on the jaw. So just carefully pick out any shapes. Like there's two little muscles that show on that jaw. And we want to paint the tops of them, but leave a shadow on the bottom. This bit of his jawline, we want to paint up along the edges of the teeth, but not onto the teeth. So those teeth already should have some burgundy wine and a rim of green liner around them. So don't cover that green liner with this color. Paint up to the edge of the green liner, but leave a shadow around each of those teeth. We'll do the same thing on the teeth on the top. There's like a little muscle that hangs down under his cheek. His got some oddly placed teeth in that upper jaw. We bring this color down almost to that green liner. He's got a nostril there on the top of his snout. We're going to paint up to the bottom of the nostril. On the bottom, but on the top, leave the nostril dark. Like there's shadow being cast by the top edge of it. And then we need to do his cheek. So put that highlight line along the top of his cheek. And above that cheek, there's like one eyelid. And that would be like his lower eyelid that comes up to protect his eye. So we're going to paint the top of that eyelid green. And you should be left with a pretty well-defined lower eyelid and a burgundy wine red eye outlined in dark green above that. This little bit of skin at the back of his right eye, going to highlight that green with just the tip of the brush. And now we've got a lot of his facial features are visible. And he's got this brow ridge that goes right along above his eye. We're going to paint that green too. Give it a good strong highlight of this green. Right up to his nose. And we're going to enhance that even more when we do the next color. We'll bring out the face colors even more. Okay, so there's our defined face, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. A little bit more of a challenge on the other side, like I've already painted one of my fangs green. But the same idea, we find the shapes and highlight the top of them up to the bottom of the previous, up to the bottom of the shadow on the shape above. We just keep doing that. Need his lower eyelid highlighted again. A little bit of skin behind the eye. His nostril's a little bit harder to find on this side. Don't really see it actually. Oh, there it is, just barely visible. Highlight around it.
It's just a heavy door.
All right, so continuing working on this guy's face here. Where was I? Yes, around the eye. And we'll just, so we've got those little flaps done. We need to do the top of his nose here. That ridge along the brow. Okay, and then above the eye. There, like that. Okay, so that's where we are at now. Is very, very basic stuff. Ah, okay, got it. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, so Heather's model is one of the original Bones ones, and the details are very, very soft. That's why some of the details are not showing up as well. I'm still going to talk about putting a point on the brush, though. So let's just look at the palette for a second here. Yeah, pretend, exactly. Add some extra muscles on there that don't really exist, and fake it. Fake it with paint. Nothing wrong with that. Right. So loading the brush. I've got my reservoir of paint and the paint that I'm working with. So the first thing I'm going to do, rinse out my brush, but not thoroughly dry it out. Like my paper towel here is quite wet. Okay, there's actually quite a bit of water on that, which means that I can clean out the brush on it, but it doesn't totally dry the brush out. Then I can go and load up the brush with paint, and after I do that, there's going to be quite a bit of paint on the outside of the brush. So what I do is go back to my paper towel, which is wet, and just gently take the excess off the outside of the brush and reform the point. And then when I go to paint, the tip of the brush is loads of paint in there. The brush is nice and damp, so it's not going to dry out. And the point is really, really sharp, which lets me go back in, pick out the details that I want to hit. Am I focused? Yeah. So like, for example, in the face there, I could pick out, just the tops of certain small muscles and give them a little bit of an additional touch of color. So the paint is wet enough to flow. There's enough volume that I can lay down a layer of paint. But the point is good enough that I can control where it lands. Okay. All right. Now. All right, Ted. Thanks for joining us, man. We'll see you soon. Okay. So that was the two sides of that. So now what are we going to do? That's the main layering concept we're going to do. Highlighting the green. So what we're going to do, I'm going to grab some of the green from the reservoir, move it off to the side over here, and I'm going to make my first green highlight color. So I need to do two things. I need to increase the value, make the paint lighter, and I'm going to do that with my bit of creamy ivory. So now I've got a lighter mix of paint. It's still the same pigment, and it's got a little bit more yellow in it from that creamy ivory, but not very much. So I'm going to put just a tiny bit of yellow in there as well. Okay, and the yellow is going to change the character of that green quite a bit. So it's lighter, but it's also warmer now. So I desaturated the paint when I added the white to make it lighter. But then I increased the saturation of yellow by putting the yellow back in. So the paint is both lighter and a little bit warmer. So we're going to get stronger highlights because our highlights are both going to be lighter and warmer than the previous layer. And that's the idea we're aiming for here. So now I'm going to load my brush exactly as I just described. And this color is going to dominate in the center. So I'm going to do this probably as far out as the top of that thumb. And these highlights are much smaller than the previous ones. So these go inside the previous highlight, but the positioning is similar. So we'll go, let's say on this forearm, we want a highlight that goes along the forearm on the side towards the light. And we pull that highlight right up to the edge of the shadow at the bottom of the next group of muscles up. Do the one underneath that bicep as well. And there's that little muscle under his armpit again. And it should be really obvious when I do this bicep now, kind of what we're going for. So there's the dark shadow. There's a little bit, actually the military green kind of disappeared on this one, but I want to preserve that. So this highlight is going to start on the curve of the muscle. There's the curve of the muscle. And go forward towards the light source, right up to the bottom edge of the next shape. And it's going to darken as it dries, and some of that's going to disappear. So now on all of these scales on his shoulder, I'm going to do the same thing on the top of each of those scales. Again, preserving that shadow in between each scale, but working to make sure that that shape has a fairly strong highlight. And then I'm going to connect this across to that collarbone. Even though I know it's a scale, it's simulating the human anatomy collarbone. And this highlight goes on the top of that. But not completely covering over our previous shadow layer. And we'll work our way forward with that. And by forward I mean towards the light, so towards the light source in the center like that. Get those little scales and everything. Right up to the bottom of that next shape. Okay? Now, let's start working our way through some of these along the side. So the next big scale, we don't want to go right to the edge. We want to preserve that military green that's right there and work a little bit in from that. And then the same thing again. Bring those highlights across so that the center is where most of the paint lands to create the highlight. And we'll do that again, all the way along, all the way down. But don't completely cover over the leaf green from the previous layer. So we should end up with green liner, military green, leaf green, and then this warmer, lighter mix that we've made. Bringing the highlights towards there. You can really see that gleam coming into the center of his chest. And that's what we're aiming to build up. On the next one, leave even more of the leaf green. Brush strokes still the same direction, working towards the center. Same thing on that little one underneath in the center. Kind of weird how that one or two scales aren't actually split. And then the next layer. Right up to the edge of that scale. And keep working our way down. As we get further to the bottom, we want these highlights to start being smaller and smaller to reflect the fact that our light is at the center at the top. These little scales on the periphery get a few little dots, but not too much. We don't want them to really dominate. And then this muscle in his leg gets a relatively small highlight. Like that. It's the same shape as the previous one. Top of the muscle. Keeping the light moving towards the center. Now I think we need just a touch of light on this one as well, so I'll just do like just about, I don't know, 2 millimeters wide on the top of that muscle. Something like that. Keep the light coming into the center. That's about all we need. We don't need more than that. And I think we can do maybe, there's 3 or 4 little links on this, or not links, but little scales on his tail, that if we do the center of those, we keep the idea of the tail present without the tail starting to dominate. And this is probably as light as we would go on the tail. And then we can do the other muscles to keep everything in balance. So on the other leg, do the same position on that groin muscle, that tendon. This muscle on the other leg, again, similar small highlight. Slightly larger one on that quad or whatever on his leg. Little scales around the periphery. Doop, 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 boop. And then his belly scales. In the same way, working our way up. So the question becomes, is that light enough to really show our intended light source or spotlight in the center of this guy? And anybody who's been following along this series of paint-alongs knows the answer to that. The answer is no. We need to go quite a bit lighter than that. So let's quickly keep moving through this color. Now I'm going to have to make more. Mine ran out. Hopefully I can accurately recreate that last color. No, I probably can't. I've made a mess. That's the challenge. You got to mix up enough paint to do the job. And I have not made enough, so make some more. And now hopefully the colors are going to match, which is challenging. How do I check to see if my colors match? Well, I can do a highlight. Now, if it's too light, I don't want to put this on the periphery. It'll be okay if it's too dark and I put it in the middle. So let me redo the previous highlight where I've already painted it and see what this looks like when it dries. That's too light. But we have to wait till it dries because it'll darken as it dries. You see it disappearing, disappearing, disappearing. But it is a little too light. So I'm going to put some dark back in this corner down here. Some dark green back in there. And let's do that again. Still a little bit light, but it's better than the previous one. Okay, so I'm going to redo that highlight, and then I'll keep going as though I hadn't run out of paint. Keep going on those muscles. Hey, that's looking good, Belle the cat. Well done. You're on the right track. Top of the clavicle. Remember, we need to connect the clavicle to that shoulder, top of the tendon. That's brilliant. You'll be doing these instead of me before long. Right up to the neck. Okay, now, did I miss anywhere critical? No. We need to do the other arm. Bicep at the top of that. A little bit on the forearm. Back of the thumb. Top of the forefinger. There we go. Okay. Have we missed anything? We haven't done the face. We're going to do the face after we do the back. So we're going to go around to the back now, and I'm really going to focus just on the top groups of muscles. Not going to go any lower than this part of his back because the light is from the front of him. So we've got everything on his back highlighted, and we don't need to take those highlights any higher at this stage. So center of each of those scales, we're going to work our way across his back. Gotta clean my brush. Point on my brush is failing. There we go. Okay, and right, so we did the back of that arm. Oh, goodness. Tops of the scales. So I'm only going down to around the center of his back. I'm not going to go down his hips or along the back of the legs, just really the tops of the muscles of his arms. See this? There's 1, 2, 3, 4 spikes. I'm not going any lower than that fourth spike. Okay, I'm ready to do his face now. So I'm going to start on this side this time. I'm going to highlight the edge of his nose, looking for that nostril again. There it is. That cheekbone. That separate little muscle behind his eye. The lower eyelid. I'm picking out the lower eyelid separately again. And then each of these little muscle groups along his jaw, the back of his jawline, the root of each of these teeth, and that heavy ridge above his eye. I'm going to make sure I get that on the front edge of it as well. And that little outline of that spine. Oh, totally concealed his nostril of my mistake. I don't know if you can see that, but his nostril disappeared. So I'm just going to go off camera for a sec and put his nostril back. I can't do that on camera because of the position. Sorry. Okay, so there's his nostrils back. Alright. And now I've got to clean my brush out quite carefully. Actually, there was something else I made a mess on. This tooth. It's like a tooth right there. Fix that. Okay, now. So we did the highlighting. Oh, I've missed a few scales. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to do the other side on the face. Did I already do that? It looks like I already did it, but I don't think I did. Getting confused in my old age. There we go. Okay, so it's a pretty bright highlight. And we're going to go one level lighter. So I'm going to take a big dollop of yellow this time. Add it into the mix. Add more white into the mix. So this is going to be quite a bit lighter. Let me show you what that looks like up close. So this was the leaf green. First mixture. second mixture. It's quite a bit lighter. Okay, and this is going to be focused really into the center of the figure. So we've been going about 2 hours now. It's amazing, like that last little bit we did actually took up quite a bit more time than I expected. So just to give you a sense of sort of how far out are these going to go. So there's the bicep. This is going to go as a round highlight in the center of that bicep, about that much. And then on these up here, still connecting that collarbone in and right up towards the center like that. So this is the area that we want to emphasize most, is in here. So now we're going to do this other arm first. Check a couple highlights on there, top of the bicep, etc., etc. Okay. And now I'm going to bring them into the center. There we go, like that. So I'm still using unthinned paint, but I'm using brushstroke control and brushstroke direction to give me the layering effect transitions that I'm looking for. And in this case, I am not going to go back and glaze over that, because I really like this clean, bright look that I'm getting. Now, if I was to airbrush blend these, I might go back in and smooth things out a little bit. But in this case, I feel like I almost don't need that. It's come together pretty well. And I'm not going to go all the way down his body now. I'm just going to do this color in the center, at the top where I want all this to be brightest. Now the approach I've taken has made him look really, really smooth. We could also start giving him some like battle damage and a few scars and things like that by doing a few like little scratches. Let's put a little scratch along his gut, like he got hit by a sword. There's another old scar, a few little marks like that, where he's been stabbed once or twice. Down his bicep, across his chest. Okay, we can do a few things like that, make it a little bit more battle weary. We do need to take this color now onto the back a little bit. Its color needs to hit no lower than the top of this second spine. So some of the tops of these scales on the back. For sure the top of the scales on the tops of his shoulders. The little spine on the crown of his head, but only on the side facing the light. And now we got to do some more work around his face to really bring that up. So I've loaded my brush as usual, and I'm going to start with that most difficult muscle right behind his eyelid. Cheek muscle. Bit of strong brow above the eye. Now you can add like little textures and things if you want to. make little jagged marks, like his muzzle is a little bit beat up from constant fighting or whatever, or you can just make it look smooth, like maybe he's a fresh young warrior out there fighting. In this particular group of miniatures, there's a guy called the Lizardman Tyrant, who's clearly like the most badass, biggest boss of these lizard men, I should say lizard folk. And I tend to think that that's like the most veteran of them all. So this guy probably shouldn't be quite so dominant looking, you know, like he's succeeded at 1,000 fights or anything like that. He should look a little bit more subdued. But we are going to give him... Now, if you make a mistake like I just did right there, I just painted over my shadow by mistake. And I quickly tried to lift it out with my brush. I've lifted some of it back out, but it didn't entirely work. So what I'm going to have to do is go back and put that one little shadow back in a moment. Not a showstopper, just we're getting close to where we want to be. I want to be a little bit more careful. Maybe Geoff should talk less. Nah. There we go. And soon we'll be able to start putting in some more of those fun little features. Now we're going to paint the other side of his face. Snout. All right. Oh, sorry, I didn't even realize it drifted off the screen. My apologies. There we go, we're back. Feeling pretty happy with how this guy's looking. But what he really needs now is some teeth and some other good little details. So we did a lot of work on building up his skin tone and that kind of stuff, but now we do need to do some details. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is paint his mouth. So let's throw some pale violet or whatever magenta you've got laying around into the palette. I'm going to mix that with my burgundy wine. Now, you're going to ask, why didn't I use red violet? And I just feel like that color would be too saturated. I'm going to do like a desaturated, sort of a pink tongue. I don't want it to be like really over the top. So load up my brush the same way. And I'm just going to put little... You could do this by dappling, like putting stipples. Like you can see the taste buds in his tongue, his little rough lizardy tongue. Or you can just do it smooth, whatever appeals to you at the moment. Concentrate that more and more towards the tip of his tongue. Now what we're going to do, we are going to grab, let's use earth brown. And we're going to put just put a little bit earth brown, a little bit of tanned leather. I'm just going to make a messy sort of brown color, a light brown color, and this will be the base coat of his teeth. So now what I'm going to do is all of these fangs, teeth, going to paint them individually with this color. But we're also going to highlight these with another color in a moment. I just realized no, it's something weird in this sculpt going on there. There's like a weird shape there in his jaw. So I'll just paint the teeth and keep going like I intended it to look this way. I got a bunch of teeth painted. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to highlight those by putting some creamy ivory into that mix, quite a bit of creamy ivory, and a touch of yellow. Because these teeth and everything are all lit by the same color, same light source. And I'm going to go back and highlight each of these teeth like they're polished and gleaming in the sunlight. And our lizard man is baring his teeth to threaten anybody in the environment. Any adventurers coming nearby, threatening the nest or whatever. Not that adventurers would ever threaten their nests, I'm sure. Go. Nice highlighted teeth. And I think I want to put a little bit of that pink or that yellow and whatever into the pink. So I'm going to grab some creamy ivory, some pale violet, and a little dollop of happy yellow. Don't use an unhappy yellow, only use a happy yellow. And we're going to put a few more dots on that tongue. And the main thing that's going to really make this tongue stand out is that little tiny bit of yellow that was added in. And I'm doing like little taste buds on his tongue. Little tiny taste buddy dots. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. Okay, and I could also use this color for the whites of his eyes, but yeah, the hell with it, let's do that. I'm going to do the whites of his eyes, this crazy pink color, same color that I just used on his tongue. And I'm going to do a two-step eye, which means I've already got his iris painted purple. I'm just going to put a little bit of a white dot on each side. And the color that's left behind is going to be his iris. I'm going to do that on both eyes. Now the eyes look opposite directions. They can't see each other. So it doesn't have to be like perfect, like he's looking in a specific direction. There we go. Oh, those are creepy. I like that. There we go. So now he's got some creepy little eyes. On the go. If you're feeling saucy, you could give him some reflection dots. I would use pure white for that though, not creamy ivory. And we could use that same brown mixture. Let's use a bit of earth brown and leather brown together. And let's use that to paint these spikes on his back. I'm going to do a little bit different and make the little tiny lines on the spines on his back. And pull this color out towards the tip of each spine. Almost like it's it's a horn, you know? Just lay those out with some lines. I'm going to put more lines on the top than on the side so it looks like a highlight. I'll do that on all of those, including his little unicorn horn on the top. Then I'm going to grab that same color that I made to do his teeth. Mixture of yellow and ivory and all kinds of things. And put just one or two, oh that was too much, on each of these spines. Pulling the paint out towards the tip. Build up a highlight. Again, that was too much. Just a little bit on each one. It's just the particularly awkward angle of this mini today. Makes it really hard to see what I'm doing. There we go, that's better. And there's a little unicorn horn. Okay, pretty good, pretty happy with that. I really want to do one more highlight. So I'm gonna put one more. Oh, that was way too much. I'm gonna put another dollop of creamy ivory into green. And more yellow. More ivory. More yellow. Just need to go one level higher for me to be happy. So I'm going back to my creamy ivory, yellow, and green mixes. I'm adding more white, sorry, more ivory, adding more yellow. I just want some of these spaces to really stand out a little bit more. So, tip of his shoulder, right there on both sides. Make that stand out. And the center of his collarbone, right towards the center. And that center line of all those scales down his chest. This needs to be a little bit lighter. And look at that, I made a mistake. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a dot now where I painted too quickly. Okay, so a little bit extra highlighting on his face, around that eye, top of that cheekbone, top of his nose. Yeah, that makes me happier. Okay. So now let's do let's do some aqua on his face, like I said I was going to do. Make sure we do that before we run out of time. So I'll put some surf aqua in my palette. And what I'm going to do now, the surf aqua is quite a nice bright color, but it's a little bit too high value, wrong, too dark compared to our current mixes. So I'm going to mix some of this with this green from a little bit, not our brightest green, but like one step down from there. I'm going to mix that 50-50 with the surf aqua to see kind of what it looks like. And it darkened that color quite a bit. And then I'm going to take that color and paint it in. So I'm looking at his neck. I'm interested to decide where should this blue sit. I don't want it up on his jawline. Don't want it up there. I want it kind of above this tendon and below his jaw. So we'll add that in there. And I don't know if you can see that as a bit more blue than it used to be. And we'll do some little stripes of this in the zone above his collarbone. A little bit of blue, a little bit of blue. There. And then I think I'm going to put some of it in the peripheral zone on his chest. Definitely not in the center. Out here on the edge, I'm going to put blue spots just stippled in. Yeah, that's what I like. Like that. A few little blue spots stippled in on the shadow side of the two big scales on his chest. Now, you're going to say, you didn't use the blue, Geoff. Well, what I did do was increase the blue saturation by mixing the blue in with our green. So the green already contains blue, and I made it bluer by adding a bit of the teal into that color. And I'm pretty happy with that. I think now what I'm going to do is just highlight that a little bit on his neck by putting some, what's this color called? Our white. What am I using for white? Creamy ivory. And just a little bit of yellow. So I've got a lighter blue mix now. Oh, nice. Looking good. Just people keep dropping the photos in there today, and that's looking really, really good. I'm super impressed. So I can highlight this little bit of his neck with this blue now. A few more little spots along the edges of the scales. But I did want him to have kind of a really blue look in that part. So what I'm going to do, let's try a little bit of a blue ink glaze just for fun. This wasn't the original plan, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I grabbed a blue ink. Doesn't really matter what blue ink you use. These inks kind of all work the same way. Except for like the white ink and the flesh ink. They tend to be much more opaque. But this should be a transparent blue ink, and we'll test that theory. I'm going to grab a dollop of it, and I'm going to thin it way down with water, Make it super thin. Yeah, love it. The blue shows up really good on the neck. And then I'm going to test it on my thumb, make sure it's nice and transparent. It is. And then I'm going to glaze this, which means I'm going to put a very, very thin layer on. And I'm going to bring my brush gently across like this. I'll leave a little bit of blue at the shadow edge of his chest. So I'm going to start under the shadow. I'm going to pull backwards across his chest. And this is a much more saturated blue. And it will also filter out the other colors a little bit. Meaning that the blue element that I put in there is going to show up much more now than it did a moment ago. And we'll do that on the other side of his chest as well. He's going to look very macho. Like he's ready to challenge one of the senior lizard men. Yeah, I dig it. I like it. There he is. Okay, so I might add more blue leather, but for now I'm happy with that. So the next thing I'm going to do is just bring out the leather a bit. So I had my russet brown. That was the base coat of the leather. I said I was going to use polished leather or oiled leather as my leather color. So let's grab some of that. Put that into the happy palette. Oh, paint everywhere. Okay, so my polished or oiled leather or whatever it is more of a brown color. I'm going to put some marks on the edges of these leather straps, and I'm going to concentrate those marks more than towards the light source than towards the shadow side, and just going to dab them in there, put some damage onto these beat up leather straps that this guy's using for grips on his spear. There we go. Do the same thing on these ones up here at the top holding the spearhead on. And we need to do that a little bit more carefully on this thing on his wrist. I want to fully explain that though. Let's do it. So a few little marks on the things on his wrists. Right on. We'll see you next time, man. Thanks for painting along. I appreciate it. Go. We got some more leather straps. Leather strap on the shield. Okay. Forgot to do the backs of these ones on the spear. Give them the speed paint approach. Pretty happy with that. And we still need to do one layer of highlight on the spear. So this tanned leather was the color I did on the spear initially. The color I used to highlight the teeth, I'm just going to put a dollop of tanned leather into that color that I was using on the teeth, and I'll use that to highlight the spear. So I'm going to start down by his leg down there, down here. and just put a little bit of a highlight down there. But I'm going to do more of that up at the top. So we end up with a definite lighter highlight at the top of the spear than at the bottom. And I'm only doing it on the side of the spear pointing towards his face, so that we definitely have a light and a dark side to the spear. We could add a bit of creamy ivory into that again. Make it lighter again. Of course, I got some blue in the mix. That wasn't really intended. Oh, Heather. Well done. Let's take... Oh, my gosh. I got to show that to people. Heather's been painting along. And that is amazing. There we go. That is good work. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. Really strong highlighting. Really good. Just well done. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. This is a slightly lighter color now, and I'll do a little bit more highlighting on the spear, just up by his upper hand. Just realized I forgot to highlight his claws and his toenails and stuff. Might be something you have to do on your own, because I feel like I'm getting low on time. Yeah, I got about half an hour left. And I still want to do his spear blade. There we go. A little quick and dirty on these talons. Just a little bit of a brown color on the tips of those talons. We don't want them to really stand out. They just need to be slightly different color from his skin. Both of you, like Heather and Belle the cat, you guys have done really, really well. Like, I know I go way too fast, but you have impressed me by keeping up all the way through, I gotta say. All right, tan leather. Back to the tan leather again. We're gonna do a little bit more highlighting on the leather straps on the on his arms, and on the straps on the spear. Yeah, I know that's why a lot of people listen in to this class, and then they go and follow on YouTube to paint on their own speed. And I think that's kind of the best way in some ways, is to do what I'm doing at your own speed and try to get the lessons. Now, if you want like the challenge like Heather does of there's a thing that happens when you try to paint to a certain level really fast, and your brushstroke efficiency improves, your precision improves. There's a payoff to doing it, but if you're a beginner, it can be very frustrating to try to keep up with, you know, somebody who's going 1,000 miles an hour. I'm pretty happy with that, actually. I'm liking the look of that. I need to just do a quick couple of things to make sure I kind of know what's going on here. I'm going to quickly pick out those leaves. You don't have to do this now. You can do this whenever you want. I just need it to give myself a sense of what the balance is looking like on this thing. A little bit of brown on the base. Just going to pick out a few shapes there so I get a sense of what the base looks like. Okay. Okay. What am I doing? I'm using a slightly higher value paint. It's a gray, really, made by just slapping together the base earth brown and the leaf green I've been using. And what that's doing for me is just giving me a sense of what does my figure look like in context with its background. And I can get a sense of how brightly highlighted he is. He's pretty brightly highlighted, so I'm pretty happy with that. I think he does need one slightly lighter highlight on his spear. I'll do that right now. And you'll see the difference as soon as I do it. Like, it does need to be fairly bright. Right about there. Sorry, right there. Puts things a little bit better in balance. And why does that matter particularly? Because I am going to do the NMM on that spear tip now. And I think we are ready for that. All right. Doesn't have a shell, but what are you going to do? Okay, so where is my tarnished copper and my new copper? So we need tarnished copper, new copper, and some pure white for the shiny bits. I've just had a glance back at those photos, and I'm really impressed. Like, it's good. Like, people have a hard time quite often just forcing the highlights to be high enough, and I have a hard time like keeping the highlights muted. And you guys have it's really good. You've made them shine. I'm really happy. Okay, so I got way too much paint in my palette. There's my we're going to start with the tarnished copper color. This red brown. And that we're going to put as layers over the spearhead. So there's our spearhead. It's got all these little shapes. So we're going to pick out the overall shape of the spearhead first. So it's like a cone. So I'm painting the half of the cone facing towards the light as a cone. And I do the same thing on the other side. So I'm a little bit ignoring that sort of texture that's been done on there. You could do this with stippling if you wanted to make it look a bit more hammered. Like I said, it was like beaten into this shape. But generally speaking, the main thing I want is that cone shape to be visible to start with. Get this nice red copper color. I'm just swiftly putting in a couple of coats of this. As each one dries, I'm doing another coat right over top right away to bring up that cone shape. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab hold of the new copper, and I'm going to make a 50-50. I don't have to, but I'm going to make a 50-50 mix with the tarnished copper. And then with this color, I'm going to pick out my little smaller shapes on spearhead. So there's all these little lines. So if you picture like the flint, wherever a piece of flint was flaked away from it, it has a very sharp edge, and then a little bit of a like a cup shape underneath it. So those edges catch light, and I'm sort of filling the bottom of each of those cups with a little bit of reflected light. Very much the inverse of what I was doing with the skin tone earlier. So I'm thinking of each of those little scalloped out cup shapes as being like a little vessel that catches a little bowl of light at its bottom. And I'm being careful not to completely cover over the previous layer of copper color. There we go. And now I'm going to use just straight new copper. And do the same thing again, but smaller, much smaller, and focusing on any little peaks that would catch the edge or have like a little dot of color on them or dot of light on them. Those are the bits that are going to appear shinier. Now, part of what happens is we do this and the copper color gets desaturated. So after this layer we can go back and do a little bit more, like we could glaze back in the copper color or something like that. And then afterwards, we're going to come back and put in little bright white dots where the copper would be reflecting the light the most. So edges and points will catch the light. So we defined the overall shape, defined some initial highlights, and now we're bringing up the stuff which really would catch the light. And I think I'm just going to skip that last step of, I was just mentioning about glazing in the color. We could, but I'm not going to. I'm going to make a 50-50 mix of pure white and new copper. And I'm going to highlight again, just think of it as edge highlighting these tiny little shapes just with like stippled little tiny dots, so it's very, very small highlights. And they don't have to connect. But I do want more of them on the edge of the spear pointing at our light source, which is over by his face. So just go right along that whole sharp edge which is facing him, giving it a nice sharp primitive spiky look. Then I'm going to go straight to pure white and do just a few little dots on the tip and where I think the cat light would catch the most. Just a few little dots. There we go. Now we've got our shiny looking metal spear. If you're feeling kind of saucy, you can put some of that surf. I would mix surf aqua. I don't have the right colors on here for that, but I would put some surf aqua along the back of the blade. Like it's almost like the back of the blade is a little bit of blue corrosion on it. Not much, just a touch to backlight the edge of the blade. Maybe it's reflecting the water nearby or something. Not much, because you don't want it to overwhelm and ruin your overall shiny look, but just a little bit of a look of blue on the back of the edge. There. Pretty happy with that. Okay, and I think the last thing I'm going to do is put a little tiny specular highlight of white in his eye. So I'm going to grab pure white. I'm grabbing a 00 sable brush. And let's see if I can do this first try or not. Well, apparently I can, because it's done. The position of the dot should be pointing in the direction of the light source, which for us is pretty much straight up. So I'll just put the little white dot a little bit closer to the front so it doesn't look too alien. We'll do that on both eyes. Smallest white dot that you can muster. Oh, did I wipe white paint all over him? I did not. That's a bit of luck. Alright, so there we go. There's our primitive spearman. I would like to have been able to do the turtle shell, but I'm kind of out of time on that. So I apologize for that. But we've got some NMM, some very strong central lighting. And this would be a base that would look great with a little bit of additional plant material on it. So I hope you enjoyed that. And we'll see you for the next one. Next week is... what is the next one? Ooh, an assassin. Yes, an assassin. That's going to be fun. Twin-bladed assassin. So there we go. We'll see you next time.